Sincere followers of Christ love the Scriptures. We find that they speak to our lives in many different and very personal ways. This is a precious truth about Scripture that Christians should never forget. But many times, this wonderfully personal dimension of Scripture can actually cause us to lose sight of something that we must always remember. The Bible was not written directly to you or me. In the first place, Scripture was written to other people who lived thousands of years ago. So as we try to understand how the Scriptures apply to our lives today, we must always be careful to base our modern applications on the original meaning of Scripture. This is a series of lessons that we have entitled Father Abraham. And in these lessons, we're exploring the account of Abraham's life that appears in Genesis chapter 11, verse 10 through chapter 25, verse 18. This is the second of 3 introductory lessons, and we've entitled this lesson, The Life of Abraham, Original Meaning. In this lesson, we'll see how important it is to read the stories of Abraham's life in light of when they were written and to whom they were written. We'll explore the original impact these stories were intended to have on the nation of Israel as they followed Moses toward the Promised Land. We'll explore the original meaning of Genesis chapter 11, verse 10 through chapter 25, verse 18 by looking at 2 main issues. First, we'll point out how Moses drew connections between the history of Abraham's life and the experiences of his original audience. And second, we'll summarize some of the implications these connections had for the original audience. Before we look at the original meaning of the life of Abraham, we should take a moment to review what we saw in the previous lesson. Up to this point, we've focused on 2 critical issues. First, we suggested that Genesis chapter 12, verses 1 through 3 reveals 4 major themes in the story of Abraham. God's kindness to Abraham, the many ways God showed mercy to the patriarch. Abraham's responsibility to be loyal to God, the many ways God expected Abraham to obey him. God's blessings to Abraham, the promises of a great nation, many children, a land, and a great name. And God's blessings through Abraham to others, the promise that Abraham would be a blessing to all the families of the earth. Beyond this, we also saw that these major themes shaped the way Abraham's story was told in Genesis. We learned that the story of Abraham divides into 5 symmetrical steps. First, we begin with Abraham's background and early experiences in chapter 11, verse 10 through chapter 12, verse 9. Second, several episodes concentrate on Abraham's earlier interactions with representatives of other peoples in chapter 12, verse 10 through chapter 14, verse 24. The third and central segment of Abraham's life focuses on the covenant that God made with Abraham in chapter 15, verse 1 through chapter 17, verse 27. The fourth section of Abraham's life turns to Abraham's later interactions with representatives of other peoples in chapter 18, verse 1 through chapter 21, verse 34. And the fifth segment deals with Abraham's progeny and death in chapter 22, verse 1 through chapter 25, verse 18. These 5 steps present the patriarch's life in a symmetrical pattern. The third section of chapter 15, verse 1 through chapter 17, verse 27, which deals with God's covenant with Abraham, serves as the centerpiece of Abraham's life. The second and fourth sections correspond to each other as they both focus on Abraham's interactions with other peoples. The first and last sections correspond to each other further by providing bookends to Abraham's life, tracing his family line from the past and into the future. In many respects, this lesson will build on these insights into the structure and content of Abraham's life. With this review in mind, we're ready to move into the main concerns of this lesson, the original meaning of the life of Abraham in the book of Genesis. Let's begin by exploring the connections that exist between the stories about Abraham and the experiences of Israel who first received these stories. In this series of lessons, we're building our interpretation of the life of Abraham on the assumption that these stories were originally written in the days of Moses, and that they are substantially the same now as they were then. Most critical scholars believe that these stories were not written in the days of Moses, but other portions of the Old Testament, as well as Jesus himself, insisted that Moses did write Genesis. And because of this, modern Christians should affirm the Mosaic authorship of this book. But in this series, we're also concerned with going a step further. We want to grasp not just the fact that Moses wrote these stories. We want to know why he wrote them. What was his perspective on the life of Abraham? What were his purposes in writing? One of the best ways to begin to explore the original meaning of Abraham's life is to look for the ways Moses connected his stories about Abraham with the experiences of his original audience, the Israelites who followed him away from Egypt and toward the Promised Land.